I do think in the US, there's such a value set and a value system around doing the new thing and doing the different thing and being bold and entrepreneurial that as a church planter, whether it's from believers or unbelievers, there's an inherent interest in the new thing. And there's even among your community, there's this question of, oh, a new thing in town? You know, a church, can you upgrade me? And there's kind of this curiosity and this interest. And I think here I just realized nobody cares about my church plant.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sowers Podcast. My name is Matt Naismith, and I am your host. This podcast features stories of Canadian church planters and leaders who are influencing kingdom movement and impacting their communities. Whether you're a church planter, pastor in a church, part of a church planting team, or someone just wanting to learn more, we pray you get inspired to become a sower in the places where you live, work, learn, and play. We pray this is a blessing to you, and if it is, we would ask you to share links to episodes, subscribe on whatever platform you are using. With that, let's get to our next conversation. Welcome back, friends, to the Sowers Podcast. Thanks for joining us for another conversation and another episode, which will hopefully inspire you to become a sower in the places where you live, work, learn, and play. Hey, I'd love to hear your stories. If you have been inspired and you have become more of a sower than before you started this podcast, would love to hear that story. And so would you go ahead and share it with ask@thesowerspod.ca. Once again, that is ask@thesowerspod.ca. Also, a number of episodes ago, I said I'd love to do some Q&A. And so if you have any questions that you would like me to consider answering, we'll do kind of a mailbag, quick hit question and answer. Please send those questions to ask@thesowerspod.ca. Once again, that's ask@thesowerspod.ca, and we'll feature that on a future episode. Well, today I'm excited for you to hear a conversation that I had with Mikey Filicicchia. Mikey is the pastor of Zoe Church in downtown Toronto. Mikey shares about his experience of coming to know Jesus in the United States and then his eventual call to come and to plant a church in Toronto, which he calls a missionary's playground. And so without further ado, here is that conversation with Mikey Filicicchia. Well, Mikey, I want to thank you for joining the Sowers Podcast. It's great to have you on and to engage in a conversation.
Glad to be here, man. I am an avid listener, so glad to now be on the other end.
Mikey, I'd love for you to share with our listeners your background and a bit of your story. Something that I found is a theme as I've interviewed people is typically their story and their background gives a bit of an influence or influences their philosophy of ministry. So why don't you share a bit of your background and your story for us?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I would say I grew up with some church, but didn't necessarily grow up in the church, so to speak. When my faith really became something that began to be serious to me, kind of right around entering into junior high years. And just before that, the experiences of the church I had, I think honestly, all I took away at that point in my life was this is a place where people hear, lessons about how to be a good person. And that was kind of my little Sunday school understanding. And at that age, I just didn't care so much for that. But I think what I was really looking for, even if I didn't know it, was something that would really move me and compel me and maybe map something for my future, be exciting. And so, at that stage of my life, I didn't want much to do with church. I just thought, I Sunday morning, NFL football, that's what I want. That's exciting. That's where the action's at. And I just thought this is so much cooler than church. But one thing really changed for me when I think probably Sunday mornings got to be maybe a little too much of a drag for my dad to try and get me to church because I was too hooked on football. So I found my way to a Saturday night service, and it was a church I'd never been at before. And there were two things that really struck me. One was the way people were singing was they had their hands in the air and their hearts were just so engaged. And I was like, man, something about, these people really believe in something. The other thing was, it was in a giant warehouse and there was over 1,000 people there. And I was like, what is going on here? And I just thought something else is happening. And what also happened that night that I think really just stuck with me was, it's actually a message on Jesus talking about the signs of the end of the age. And, and something just riveted me about that, I think, at that time, because what it did is it really shattered this idea that religion or faith or Christianity is just stories or a set of morals, but it actually maybe gives me a grounding on what the world is like or where it's going. And the thought that Jesus had predictions for what was going to happen in the future, it was just totally new to me. And I think it really set me on this course of, well, if he's saying something about like actually my life and my world, not just anyone's life, like I need to evaluate it and consider it, and I need to see if I need to take Jesus seriously. And even at that age, even at 13, I really just embarked on reading the New Testament and reading the words of Jesus. And I think the best language I had for it as I really dove into the words of Jesus was like, I've just never heard anyone talk like this. And just his words just cut to my heart, and I think one of the first verses that I memorized or highlighted or was just like, what is this? I can still remember that moment and where it was on the page when Jesus said, it's not a healthy who need a doctor, but it's the sick. That really jumped out at me. And I remember thinking, I remember pausing to myself, because he was keeping company with people who were unpopular. And I asked myself, have I ever seen that in my whole life? Have I ever seen someone keeping company with disreputable people or unattractive people just for the sake of their healing? And I thought, no. And not only that, but so much of the source of my pain up to that point in life was just not being cool enough, not being attractive enough, not being fit enough or whatever for people to want to hang out with me and spend time with me. And the thought that someone could operate on this other operating system of love to bring healing to unwanted people, oh man, it just like flipped on the switch. And I just thought, he's different. And I need to really think about it, if I want to follow him.
Wow. So what happens next, in your story? You have these moments, this Jesus is becoming increasingly compelling. What happens in your life, and was there a specific call to pastoral ministry, or how did that all come about?
Yeah, what happened was I very soon after that found myself in a church plant. And a part of I guess for that first year, just like a junior high youth group in a church plant, and soon to be a high school youth group, which would really become kind of the bulk of my experience, my first, real experience involved in the church. And so yeah, just that was, I guess, now, it was actually the first church plant of Harvest Bible Chapel, the OG, the original. And so I found myself just in this youth group, and so what I loved about my early just youth group experience was there was such an emphasis on just all the stuff that for me is just, oh my goodness, it's the foundations of faith. So just memorizing and knowing the scripture, praying together and giving serious time to prayer, confessing our sin and memorizing the scripture, and being of service in the community. We just had outreaches to refugee students, and would pray and sing for people in the convalescent home. And I look back and I think to myself, man, what a robust, what a well-rounded, just early discipleship that I had in that community. And so just, as I got involved, and I think I was just discipled really well in the fundamentals of what makes for a healthy and flourishing faith, I really just got a vision and got to try it. And I just had this early understanding, the gospel is something to be shared, and we share it with our neighbors, and we serve the poor, and we give Jesus away, and we build each other up in him. And that was, it was a really formative experience for me.
Wow. And so when did your aspirations and the calling towards leading people start to come into view?
Yeah, in that church, there was something I heard even at that age that I've since come to um, sort of wonder about or question. I remember even hearing back then, like, you know, uh, if you can be, I heard this line of, if you can be a businessman, be a businessman. If you can be a teacher, be a teacher. But only if you can't do anything else, go into ministry. That was the line that was given, and I think the spirit of that idea was to keep people who just wanted to get into ministry for some kind of just as a career path and nothing more, to keep them out. But I remember hearing that thinking, I could do a lot of stuff. I have a lot of talents and gifts, so I should probably just never go into ministry. And I really carried that into my university years. I attended the University of Michigan. And I was on scholarship for math. I was just math was I taught math at that time, and I loved doing math. And so I was just I was really pursuing these quantitative fields, and I was getting an economics degree as well, and really just thinking, I'll go into forecasting markets and being a quant, and just kind of that whole, I had passed some actuarial exams and all those things, that just the stuff that came naturally to me and that I enjoyed, and I really enjoyed those things in school. But I found myself in a church in my college years where it took my experience in the church to the next level, and I actually felt like I experienced Acts chapter 2. We actually were together every day, and university is such this special experience where like I was in fellowship every single day. My church lived in the same residence hall as me. We were all right there, and so we had this just dynamic where hey, whenever you're not doing something, whenever you're between classes, this is the lounge that we all meet up in. And so it's like between my classes, I'm praying for my brothers and sisters, asking how their day went. We're taking risks and inviting some of our friends and telling them about Jesus over lunch together. Each night we're in each other's rooms, just studying the word and memorizing the scripture, praying for each other. And it just completely blew my mind as far as what the church could be and what an experience of biblical community was. And I was like, what? This is it. Like every day encouraging and building one another up, and living on mission together and speaking into each other's lives and seeing each other's lives every day. So you have a really rich body of data to speak into as far as, offering encouragement and offering corrections. And I think when I got a hold of that, I was like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. I didn't even know this kind of community was possible. And as I just began trying my hand at making disciples, as I just tried to share the gospel with some people and get them together, what I found was I loved it. And I sort of couldn't get enough. And in doing university ministry, since then, I've just noticed that there's often this experience that I had, which was, classes is cool and all, but like, I'm really just trying to cut all the corners I can to do as much ministry as possible, because it's what's bringing me life. And for me, when I just had a few experiences of, going out on a limb and inviting a few guys in my dorm to a Bible study, and then just seeing God start to work in their life. And now I'm baptizing them, and now they're starting to reach some of their peers. And I know just the brokenness and some of the trauma that they come from. And I'm seeing just these really bad patterns that have been passed down for generations just turn around and transform in them. And I know that what they're passing on, what they're going to pass on in the rest of their line is just pivotal and generational. I just thought to myself, in those university years, I want to make a difference. I want to change the world, all the stuff that maybe, millennial people like me thought in university. I just thought, can I change the world any better than this? Like, whatever big things I aspire to, I just felt like, I think this is where the action's at, right here in this stuff that I'm doing in just my ministry, in my campus ministry. And so I think what I just sensed from that was, I just want to keep doing the most life-giving and most impactful thing that I know that I can do. And right now it seems like this. And so I went on staff with that church I was a part of, and I just knew I want to keep getting raised up. I'm going to get more skills here. I'm going to get more disciple making experience. I want to start to multiply these fellowships, these small churches around campus. and I just want to see where it goes from there.
You said something there that your church was in your dorm hall, in your dorm with you. So I'm just thinking about that, because some people who maybe have one experience of the church would say, well, what does he mean by that? So how do you define church, or how have you come to define the church, both for yourself and we'll get into your ministry here shortly. But what is the church?
Yeah, at that time, that was I was a part of a church that really was a collection of a little more, regional small groups. We called them teams, really. And those teams were kind of, were generally speaking like 20 to 60 students each. And they were just kind of based on what residence hall were you in, what thing did you study? And they would kind of group those affinity groups together, generally geographically, but sometimes otherwise. And we called them teams. We didn't call them churches. But, when I look back, I just think of, that, and the same with my youth group experience, that the basic, even if we were attached to a wider body, this idea of these are my people, these are the people I'm in fellowship with, these are my fellow believers, and we're daily doing those one another's of the New Testament, and we're building each other up, and we're seeking after something on God's heart together. That has come to be the cornerstone of my definition of the church. And so me and my friends in the Underground Network, we have something that has sort of been dubbed the ecclesial minimum, which is just, if we had to strip it all the way down, what are the very bare bones of what the church has always been, and it can be more things and it can be other things, but at the very basis of it, we would say it is worship and its mission and its community. And so by worship, we mean that that group is founded on a devotion to Jesus as Lord. And so we are in agreement about that. And that's the thing that orients us together at all. That's like our common creed. That's our common faith. When we say mission, we mean that together we are pursuing something that is on the heart of God for the world, that we are continuing in that sort of Great Commission legacy, that the kingdom of God would come here on earth, and we want to see things, move and change in that direction, to really witness to the power of Jesus in some shape or way as sphere of society. And then we say community, we just mean not just that we're buddies, not just that we know each other, but we have an abiding commitment to build one another up in the faith. We are here to love each other and be loved by each other, to disciple each other and be discipled by each other, to share our possessions, and to in a sense have a loyalty and be covenanted together, to be committed to one another. Sometimes I'll just say, to be each other's emergency contact. And to say, I count on these people, I rely on them. That's what we mean by community. And so for me, when I heard that, I was just like, that's what I've intuited all along. I had this youth group, and sure, we were part of a big church, but when you asked me like, what was church for me, it was that youth group. That was the day in and the day out of the New Testament stuff. And so, yeah, I know it throws a lot of people off when I do it now, but when I use that word church, I'm really talking about any collection of people for whom those three things are true all at once.
I love that. It strips it right down. I was part of the Soma family churches for a while, and we would talk about a family of missionary disciples, like a family being life on life, missionaries, life on mission, and then disciples, life in community with one another under the lordship of Jesus. And that could be as small as 6, and that could be as many as, the whole gathered community. But in reality, it was the smaller missional communities that were actually living that out together. You eventually transitioned to Canada. And so let's transition there. So you're in Ann Arbor, you're at the University of Michigan, go Wolverines. I don't know if you're following their season this year. Yeah. So talk to us about, you're considering Canada and why Canada even became on your radar. And then we'll talk about some of the learnings about being in Canada now that you've been here.
Yeah, something that really started building in me when I was in Ann Arbor. There were really two things that really started stirring. One was it became increasingly clear that just the way that God has gifted me is that uh, I just always had my eye on the harvest, and I was always just preoccupied with this question of where is there not an obvious witness of the church? What corner of this campus, what corner of our city just doesn't have that yet? And that's the stuff that I would almost lose sleep over, because I just remembered for me, I need a church that was witnessing to Jesus to show up, so to speak, on my doorstep. I needed to see that and experience that, to have the word, preached to me and embodied in a way where I thought, Jesus is still alive. It's not just these words on a page. Like I needed that matching of I actually see before my very eyes the kind of Jesus I read about. This is real. And it just, for me, it became, we need that living presence of Jesus in every little pocket, every little place. I can't, I can't sleep at night knowing that there are people that just don't get to taste that community of witnesses. And so anyway, what happened when I was there was, I knew I need to get more training in this. I want to become fruitful in this. And as we were multiplying churches, and there came a span there where when I was on staff with that church where I had started eight of those micro churches. We call them micro churches now. We're in our ministry, but where I started 8 of those churches in 8 years. It was just every single year I was either sending a team out to start something in somewhere new, or I was saying, see you later to the team I was on and taking a tiny little team and going somewhere new to establish something. And we just kept going and multiplying. And as I started talking to people from other campuses and in other places, I was just like, it's so cool. God keeps multiplying these churches across our campus. Other people were like, can you come here? There was always this like, where's that going on where I am, And I started being like, yeah, like my heart breaks now for these other campuses. And I just started looking up. So that combined with this fact that I just had these special moments where I just really felt the call of God over the years to just the nations. It would just be a moment, even if I'm worshiping in another language. Oh man, something would just touch and stir my heart at this vision of all the nations gathered around the throne, and I just had this like deep sense of God where He's like, I'm gonna like that's for you, like that all the nations thing. Like I have something for you in that. I want you to be a part of this. And I just had this stirring. And I remember all the missionary playbooks I'd ever been given, so to speak. I just felt like this example was, find this unreached tribe and you learn their language. And I remember thinking, that sounds cool and all, but there's just like not like some people group calling out to me. And I remember just feeling like can I just be among all the nations? Like, does that exist? And it was just at that time where I was kind of being like, I think maybe my work here in Ann Arbor is done, but I want to be among the nations. And just that concept of global cities and global gateways just got on my radar. And I was like, oh man, there are these cities, even in North America, where just the nations have gathered and assembled in one place. And I just thought, oh my goodness, like I could actually be a part of a community of many nations all at once. I could actually raise up, missionaries and church planters among many nations from one place. And the idea of just, Paul's ministry in Ephesus, where he just raises up and trains these planters and sends them throughout the province of Asia and, and the peoples of Asia, coming to hear the gospel through that. I was just like, that's it. That for me, that was it. And so, it actually, Matt, wasn't a call to Canada as such. It was a call to Toronto, or a call to like the closest North American city where there's lots of university students and all the nations together. And so it was really stepping into Toronto and really having my eyes opened at just, the immigrant population, that the diversity of the city. It was just so different than Ann Arbor. And I remember thinking to myself, I just thought, this is the ultimate missionary playground. It doesn't get any better than this. All the nations in one spot. I thought to myself, if Paul ever came to Toronto, he would have never left, guaranteed. I just kind of thought that to myself, of like, Yeah, how do you leave a place like this if you want to plant churches and see nations come to Jesus? So I felt like a kid in the candy store, honestly, man. And I just felt like it can't get any better than this. I have to be here. And I don't know if I'll be any effective. I don't know if I'll be fruitful. I just know I need to try, because to possibly plant churches among these peoples and to be a part of a community that brings them together, and we're united in Jesus as we want to reach the diversity of this place. I just thought, I can't imagine myself anywhere else.
Friends, we'll get back to my interview with Mikey Filicicchia in just a moment. Prior to that, however, I want to let you know about Zoe Toronto's Greenhouse. Greenhouse is a summer program in downtown Toronto for adults who want to build lives of wholehearted devotion to Jesus that lasts a lifetime and multiplies disciples, churches, and renewal in the city. The 2024 program runs from June the 7th until July 27th and includes bookend weekend retreats, weekly Wednesday night main sessions with discipleship groups, and Sunday afternoons on mission in community. Greenhouse internships can be paid or unpaid and range from 12 to 40 hours per week. If you want to learn more about the Greenhouse program, you can visit zoetoronto.com/greenhouse. That is ZOE toronto.com/greenhouse. And now back to my interview with Mikey Filicicchia. What have you learned about being in Toronto? You said there was the difference, the cultural difference from Ann Arbor to Toronto, but what are some of the other differences that you experienced from being in the US, from being an American, coming into Toronto, and even just the differences in church culture?
Yeah, there were a few differences that I honestly did not anticipate. They were disorienting for me, and maybe whatever, in the grand scheme of things they seemed small, but they were big adjustments for me. I think one was I think there's this sort of like more chill effect in Canada than in the States that I was used to, and I think what I mean is, my sense is that some of the ambition and the optimism of the United States is turned down here in Canada. Someone early on told me, you have to look into founding narratives, and you have to remember that in America, the ones who ventured out and took risks, overthrew an oppressive government and formed a new nation, or, went out west and struck gold. But in Canada, the ones who took a rest froze to death on the tundra. We have a different value set around entrepreneurship for that reason.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, I didn't know that, but that's going to actually be somewhat a helpful lens for me. And so I think some of just like the ambition and excitement and optimism was turned down a bit. Early on in my church plant, I remember thinking, I'm planting amongst university students. And, in the States, anytime someone, in our church, we would say anything about a church plant, the word, it would be exciting. There would be a turnout. Even if people were like, I'm not called to go anywhere, I want to hear about your church plant. Where are you going? What are you doing? That sounds new and exciting. How adventurous. And I remember thinking, oh man, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show up and I'm going to come to this, this conference for universities, for Christian university students right downtown. And I'm going to in the social, I'm going to do my little workshop, and I'm going to say, hey, church plant coming, downtown, we're going to plant at U of T, info session here, come get trained up, multiply disciples, the stuff that you guys love. And I was like, oh yeah, the university students are going to love this. I even posted a picture of a cute baby. I had a 6-month-old. I'll come meet the cute baby. We'll buy you free bubble tea. And at this conference, of committed Christian students who are going out of the way to go to conference, 0 people showed up to that. 0. And that was an awakening for me, where I thought, what is going on here? And I think that paired with, again, if I said, oh, I'm planting on a campus, in the States, from even other people in ministry, I felt like the response was, oh, go get it, man. So glad for you. Great job. Go get it. Go take risks. Amen. Can I pray for you? And then when I was actually sharing, I was building relationships with local leaders and believers. And I said, hey, I'm planting, downtown at U of T. And And honestly, that the most common reception I felt like I got was, "Oh, good for you. Good luck with that." And I thought, do you hate me? Just because of the tone that I was used to,
Yeah.
right? Just this unbridled optimism and enterprising ambition. And I was like, do they hate me? It seems like they're not against me, but are they for me? I didn't know how to process that. And I think so yeah, I think one thing I just noticed was I do think in the US there's such a value set and a value system around doing the new thing and doing the different thing and being bold and entrepreneurial, that as a church planter, whether it's from believers or unbelievers, there's an inherent interest in the new thing. And there's even among your community, there's this question of, oh, a new thing in town, a church, can you upgrade me? And there's kind of this curiosity and this interest. And I think here I just realized nobody cares about my church plant.
Hmm.
I think that's just what sunk into me. And there have been a couple of church planters since who have come to Canada or have thought about coming to Canada, and they're asking me for stuff. And I just said, I told them, I think the number one thing you need to learn that might help you is nobody cares about your church plant here. Um, because just new is not as cool in Canada, I feel like, in the States, or at least to what I was used to. Um, so that was, but I think there was another side of that. There was another side of that. Well, because there's not this huge unbridled optimism or whatever. I think the other side of that was really interesting was there wasn't as much hostility either. Um, in my early trips out to U of T, where I was just doing the basic, just taking little surveys of random students on campus, just sitting down in the dining halls and just asking questions about what are your hopes in life, and what is your faith orientation, what would be good news to you, I just found that I think my experience of doing that kind of work in the States was kind of, oh, there's just such ideological warfare in the States. Like, even the temperature of the political conversations there is like so much like scarier and aggressive. I think that was true ideologically in the spiritual realm. Like, in the States, you sit down with a student and they might chew your head off because you're talking about Jesus, or at least they're suspicious of, what are you going to try and convert me to? What are you going to say? And when I was here doing it on campus, I kind of felt like people weren't suspicious at all. They're like, oh, here's a guy who he wants to talk about faith. Cool. And I was like, this is weird. Like, they just want to talk to me. It just feels easier at a basic emotional level to have faith conversations and get that started here. There's just not as I experienced so much less like aggressive judgment, and suspicion in that way. So I think that was an asset, or a difference too. And again, I had to still learn how to interpret those things. Like, just because this person's willing to talk to me doesn't mean they're excited about me now. um, but yeah, I think that was one. And then you mentioned something about the church, and I'll just say one again. Another early formative experience I had on campus was at my first ever U of T clubs fair. I remember, these students would be passing by, and I've got my table out, and I'm just saying, hey, you looking for a church on campus? And I've been doing campus ministry for like, whatever, 13 years at this point. And I heard something multiple times that day that I never heard once in the States. And multiple Christian students looked at me and said, oh, I'm not looking for a church. I'm looking for a fellowship. I remember I looked at them with probably the most quizzical look ever. And I thought to myself, what else is a church? It's different than a fellowship. Like, can you enlighten me? But like, all these things are moving, so it wasn't the place to be enlightened. But I was like, can you just tell me what you mean? And they're like, I just want a fellowship and not a church. And I just, at that moment, I was like, man, somehow church here is just something more institutional, more formal, more official, more something than a fellowship. That there's some kind of line drawn between those categories here that I don't understand. I never heard that in the States. And I think whether you called yourself a church or a fellowship on campus, people are like, whatever. There's a bunch of Christians getting together. It is what it is. And so I think I just became aware of, like, well, I guess it makes sense. Like, I do think in the States, there's a lot of entrepreneurialism in general, but like, and there's a lot of sort of anti-institutionalism, I think, in the States, deep in the value system of even how revolution came to be. I do think that just this sort of legacy of, you know, Wesley on the frontier, just with some farmers establishing these fellowships, popping up all everywhere, and just kind of that little small Baptist church potluck. Everybody brings the thing, and it's pretty informal, and the pastor doesn't have a pulpit. Like, I just think in the U.S. there's this much more malleable and even low churchness to the church, where it is a fellowship. It's just people getting together in the Lord. And I just abandoned that word church early on here, honestly, as far as it being a front door or a first conversation with people. I'm really just trying to speak other people's language right now. And I'm having to find other words to actually describe what we do and who we are and what they can expect. And then I try and tell people when we're discipling them, this is church, this is the church, but I sort of leave that for later.
Yeah. So what are some of those words? You said maybe you'd use fellowship. What are a couple of others you're using?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, maybe sometimes I'll use fellowship or a ministry or a house church. I do use microchurch because people go, what's that? And we get to let it be whatever it is. And so I do think that microchurch is good because it still kind of gives a nod to the church, but you put a prefix on it and now you get to define it how you want.
And maybe microchurch feels more like a fellowship than just church.
Yeah, exactly. And so, early on people are like, what's a microchurch, and just be like, well, come see, come find out. And so that's been helpful.
Now, as I hear you, and I know then the model by which you've sort of planted in, to use a more formal term, but you have obviously, if you thought that maybe I'm at this conference, I'm running this workshop, I could maybe get a little core team that could come out of this workshop, and that doesn't be the case at all. Nobody shows up. So how did that just reframe and maybe also strengthen your initial looking at Toronto of saying, okay, this is how we have to operate as the church? And so just begin to share with us then a little bit about Zoe, the model, and some of the broader then convictions of the underground network, because I think they all probably overlap quite a bit.
Yeah, I think something that I think maybe to use terms that have some tread on them, I think I had always had some sense of like missional and attractional. I was always operating on campus. On the one hand, yeah, we were knocking on doors in the residence hall, and we were doing those surveys, and we were out there on people's territory getting to know them. But also that idea of advertising and marketing and attracting people to your thing, that is such a part of campus culture for any club at any campus, that naturally the things I was always doing always had that attraction side, that recruiter side to it. And students were looking to be attracted, they were looking to be recruited, they were looking for, who can I belong to, that first week or two on campus. And so that was always a big part of it for me. But I think after one of those first experiences, I was like, my recruiter like language or playbook or something doesn't even work among the committed Christians around here. So I probably just need to like sort of abandon that entirely because I don't know what I'm doing. Like maybe the recruitment thing does work here, but not for me. Like I don't know how to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press all the way into the missional thing. I'm just going to form relationships, with people. It's not going to be come to church. It's going to be come eat pancakes at my house, on a Wednesday morning. And I'm just going to go the slow way of just finding that person of peace. And so I guess if I had to summarize it, I just kind of had to abandon some of the quick growth shortcuts that we had of like the clubs fair and stuff like that, where you could sort of get your core team of 20 overnight at the University of Michigan. And I just go, I don't know how to do that here. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to go one at a time, the Luke 10 way, house by house, find the person of peace, do your surveys, get to know them, pray with them, invite them over for one thing, and build really slowly.
And so talk to us about how that's gone and how it's challenged your faith in the process.
Yeah. As far as how it's gone, man, it's so hard to really talk about that without COVID. It was just we planted 6 months before lockdowns, and
And for our listeners, Toronto is under the one of the longest restriction orders from any other global city in the world.
yeah, and so and just the severity, just how strict and how long they were. There was just these long stretches where to do ministry in the way where you meet new people in your city was illegal. And I was like, man, I wish it wasn't illegal to meet new people around here. And I just knew so few already. So it wasn't like I had this, all these, great relationships to develop with people that we had met. We were still so new, and we spent so much time just figuring out that basic like immigration and paperwork and health cards. And in those first 6 months, we were just barely getting settled, let alone start a ministry. So, yeah, as far as how it's gone, we just planted a few very, small seeds in those first 6 months, just started a few relationships that, we did maintain over the pandemic time. I did try to find a few creative ways to engage on campus and with the students when it could only be online. But yeah, I think what happened was we just had a few relationships that we'd established kind of early on before those lockdowns hit, and there was just enough of those that I think when that started lifting, we just had a slightly bigger workforce to continue and keep on the work. But I think what I will say is that God has given us persons of peace in every season and every time, and when we've just been available and diligent to position ourselves in places where there is need, and where there are people looking for answers and looking for someone to connect with and looking for a friend or looking someone to eat pancakes with, that man, you just stay present and you make yourself available in those places, and like the right people will show up.
And at some point in the journey, Mikey, you connected with the Underground Network, and probably some of our listeners have heard of the Underground Network. I watched Tampa's documentary. You can find it easily online by searching Tampa Underground documentary, with a really and very particular vision of the church. And so how has that family of churches influenced you, and how is it continuing to, in some sense, not intentionally challenged? I remember in that documentary, they said, hey, like essentially like healthy churches everywhere for everyone, but we also need to see another way of people living out, being the body of Christ in cities, to reach the lost and to impact the harvest that is in our city.
Yeah, I think if you watch that documentary, or read Underground Church, by Brian Sanders, that the Tampa Underground and therefore the network after them, I think was really born out of this experience I think a lot of us have had, where it feels like there's this tension or this division that so many believers feel of, here's the thing that I'm called to, but maybe it's really specific or kind of really, niche in some way, where it's like, I'm called to like be with and serve the homeless people who sleep under the bridge, or I'm really called to just really serve and love and be with parents of foster kids. And I think this tension of, I have this calling, I know it's from God, it's celebrated by my church and believers, but the church has no place for it. They say, good on you, blessings, can you be on the parking team please? And it's kind of like we have these predetermined sort of boxes for what our ministry is going to be as this large organization and a large institution. And if someone's calling, we might struggle to accommodate that if we have here are the bounds of what we do. And I think so then and so what happens then is what I said about worship and community and mission. What can happen is it can fracture, which is, okay, I go to this big church with this cool worship service. That's where I get my worship. And my community, I have this like little, like women's Bible study organization that I do that with. And the mission, I've got the mission organization, parachurch, and I do it over here. And we're so lonely already that it's like, man, when you try and split someone with all those different relationships or expressions of faith, I think what I just found was, oh man, like, we just feel even in spirit, we have all these spiritual relationships, but no spiritual community. And so I think it really arose out of maybe seeing some of those things and being like, no, what if we brought them together? And I think the question at the formation of the underground really was, could we create a community and expression of the church where everything was oriented for the small and around the small and to serve the smallest? So that's really where the Underground Network came from, is we are a collection of churches and bodies that wants to equip and empower and proliferate the smallest expression of the church, the microchurch. Just where it's small enough where this group of believers can do all the one another's together, exist in tight and intimate community, and everyone can play a role. Those are the things we want to see multiply. And so what we're going to do then is we even have as network directors, because basically throughout the Underground Network, we would say we have these citywide networks of microchurches. That's what would define our church. So Zoe Toronto, the one that I lead here, is a church of microchurches. It's a network of microchurches. But what we do, even as a part of the Underground Network, is we have a covenant of directors where we say, we covenant to champion the smallest thing and make that in our networks, everything we do is to build up and to equip the smallest thing. And so, if you come from that sort of school of church where it's like, here's our church's vision, it's like, we don't have a vision in that sense. Like, our church doesn't have reach this one thing. Our vision is just a mosaic. It's just a collection of the vision of every microchurch and every microchurch leader. Together, that's our vision. And we champion all those visions and we support them and equip them. Everything we do is to serve, support, equip, and empower those expressions. And so if no one's asking for it, we're not doing it.
Well, Mikey, I want to get you back on the podcast in the future to dig into that a little bit more and the practicalities of then how you link up these different people throughout the network of the church to one another for the various things that they're called to. But for now, and on behalf of all of our listeners and myself, I just want to say thank you for joining the podcast. We'll look forward to our next conversation. Well, friends, I'm sure there is much from my conversation with Mikey that has impacted you and that you may use as an action step. And so if something stands out to you as an action step beyond what I'm going to focus on, please focus on that very thing. The thing that I want to bring emphasis to, however, is expectations. Mikey came to Toronto with certain expectations based upon his past experience, and all of us step into new things or new endeavors, our church plants, leading our churches, being part of churches with certain expectations based on past experiences. And sometimes as things get started, we realize that our expectations need to be changed. And then it's how we respond to that change when we realize it's much different than we anticipated. And so what are those things going on for you today in your church plant, in the environment that you are part of? And what are some leadership adjustments that you need to make based upon these unmet expectations as you are familiarizing yourself with this new environment? What needs to change as far as your mindset or the way that you are leading in order for your church and in order for you to take the next step forward? Maybe it's journaling some of those unmet expectations, and then it's writing a list of creative ways that you can intentionally reach the people that God has called you to reach, albeit a little bit differently than what you expected. Well, once again, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Sowers Podcast. If this has been an encouragement to you, I would invite you to share it, rate us on iTunes, rate us on Spotify, whatever platform you're using. And now, friends, a clip from my conversation next week with Mark Birch.
I understand all the theory. What I don't understand, Matt, yet is the answers necessarily, other than I know we got to pray like crazy and we got to teach our people to evangelize. And I think we need to light up the marketplace, because that's where the majority of our people are spending the majority of their waking hours. So I don't think evangelism is going to be inside the church anymore. It's going to be out in the marketplace, the schools and the sports fields. So we need to equip. When we talk about equipping the saints for ministry, in my opinion, that is not ministry inside the walls of the church. That's not putting on the coffee pot and handing out bulletins. That means, what are you doing with your workaday world and the mission field God has given you?